Welcome. This is Chuck Ridgway. I'm the Automation Technology Manager here at Horner. It's been one of those days today, but we're all excited because today we are unpacking for you Cscape 9.9 Service Pack 4. Not Part 2, Part 1. See, it's been one of those technical days, but just to kind of bring everything back where it should be, I'm going to bring in my friend Mr. Nate Beachy. Wait a minute, who's this guy with red hair? Surely that's not Nate. It's Casey Gardner. How's it going, Casey?
Hey, not too bad. How's it going, Chuck?
It's going well. Now, where the heck have you been for 2 weeks? Everybody wants to know.
Well, I just needed a break, from the old YouTube sessions. No, I actually had the lucky chance and had the birth of my firstborn child. So I had a son named Liam. He was born on March 26th, so shortly after I disappeared anyway. And it took a couple weeks off, and it's been a fun ride and an exhausting amount of lack of sleep, but it's been fun, and baby, you're happy and healthy, and couldn't have asked it to go on better.
Awesome. That's great news. Well, Cscape 9.9 Service Pack 4 is well anticipated and exciting. Not quite as exciting, certainly, as Casey's big news, but let's dive right in. All right. Okay. So, Cscape 9.9 Service Pack 4 is now available from our website after much anticipation. Thank you, Marcy Tyree, who's monitoring things out there in the internet land, our marketing guru, for getting Cscape 9.9 Service Pack 4 posted today. So a lot of hard work on her part. Thank you. Also, the companion firmware that's going along with 9.9 is version 15.5. So you will see that posted shortly, but we wanted to get the software up there as soon as we could. Also, make sure you read the release notes. It's very important. If you remember some of the conversation we had at the end of last week's live stream, new software is great, new firmware is great, but always read the release notes. Make sure that what it offers you something. Always take the opportunity to test it out well and see if you can really take advantage of some of the new features. But how do you know what the new features are unless we tell you about them? So let's go ahead and get rolling. Okay, so there's so much to unpack here with Service Pack 4 that we've broken it down into 2 sessions. So this week is part 1, where we are going to cover registration, licensing, converting register-based programs to variable-based programs. So some good topics there. And then next week, we're going to cover everything to do with enhanced IEC 61131. We've made some tremendous improvements and enhancements to our enhanced IEC 1131 languages. And we're going to go through all of those in a lot of detail with plenty of demos and all kinds of good stuff. So don't miss part 2 next week, but let's get rolling with part 1. Okay, so let's start with Cscape registration and login. So as those of you who've used Cscape for a while know, when you download Cscape, or at least the installable for Cscape, you need to register on our website if you aren't already registered. So you'll create a username, which is basically your email, and a password. That's part of registering on our website. And you use that to be able to download Cscape. That's one of the requirements, along with answering a few simple questions. But up until now, as soon as you download the installable and install it, that's kind of the end of the road in terms of registration and login. Now, a few weeks ago, we updated the security on our websites globally. So now it doesn't matter whether you are logging into the US website, to the Horner Europe website, to our licensing website for licensing product like WebMI. Doesn't make any difference. We now have a global universal login for all of our websites. And also accompanying that was an upgrade to our security system, or security software behind the, or under the scenes, if you will, or behind the scenes. So let's talk a little bit about Cscape registration and login. So what changes with Service Pack 4 is once you install Cscape and open it to run it for the first time, or actually every time you run it, you need to log in. with your username and password, the same one that you use on the Horner system. Now, after filling out some information the very first time, if you want it to, it can log you in automatically, so there's no extra work to be done there, and it just happens in the background. And most people, we think, will do that. When you log into Cscape, you then start using it in what's called registered mode. Okay, so in that scenario, yeah, you have to have your Horner email ID and password to log in, and that can happen automatically in the background after the first time if you'd like. It does require internet access, and if you are going to be licensing WebMI or some of the new features like MQTT or Enhanced IEC Runtime, then you will also have to be logged in or in registered mode to do that. However, you don't have to be in registered mode to use Cscape. We have what's called evaluation mode. So if you choose to bypass the login procedure, or maybe let's say you're in an area where there just absolutely is no internet access, then you can basically use Cscape in what's called evaluation mode. It bypasses the login, but you still have access to basically all the features except for registration. Now, if you choose just not ever to log into Cscape and to continue to bypass login every time on purpose, after 30 days, your evaluation period will expire, and then you will need to uninstall and reinstall Cscape to get another 30 days. But hopefully, that's not a step you feel like you need to take. So let's talk a little bit about why we are implementing a Cscape login at runtime every time you use Cscape and not just when you download it. Well, it's really going to give us a better opportunity to get direct user feedback on how our users are utilizing Cscape. Okay? And that direct input and direct feedback is going to allow us to make Cscape a better product. We have made, as I just mentioned, a universal login, so you don't have to remember multiple sets of usernames and password. It's always the same email address, it's always the same password on our website or at Cscape. That's the same. Another benefit that you get is, let's say you have Cscape installed on a desktop at work, and you also have it on a laptop that you take to the field. By utilizing the Cscape login, however you have Cscape set up on one computer, that'll be reflected automatically on the other computer after you log in. So there's definitely some advantages there. And then another advantage is it's allowed us to make licensing or licensed features a lot more integrated and easier to implement. And I'll show you those today. So there are certainly some benefits to utilizing the login at runtime with Cscape. Now, the basic data that we collect, and we're, of course, careful to follow all laws here in the US and Europe. That obviously goes without saying. But effectively, the basic data we collect when you log in is, of course, that you've logged in, the Windows version you're using, the keyboard language you're using, the version of Cscape you're using, and what language you're taking advantage of. And when I say language, is it the English version of Cscape or the French version of Cscape, whatever the case may be. Basically, the toolbars that you have shown, we take that information. And then if Cscape did not exit properly on a previous usage, or if it did, either way, then we'll log that information as well. So there's not a whole lot of information we're collecting by default if all you do is logged in, or log in, I should say. Now, there's also additional data that you can opt into. I know we're all used to, when we sign up for new software, we're used to basically answering a question or opting in or out to, will you share additional information to help us improve the software? And that's true whether you're talking about Apple or Microsoft or a variety of software companies. And we obviously want to get additional information that will help us improve our software. So there is an additional opt-in that's available. And if customers opt into that, here's the additional information we'll be collecting. Every time you open the application, upload, download your program or a project, create a PGM file, no, we're not copying that information. We're not taking your program. We're absolutely not doing that. Your intellectual property remains in your hands. all we're doing is logging the fact that you did open a program or download a program, for instance. And we'll also log the OCS that you're using, what language you're using in terms of logic, whether it's advanced ladder, IEC 1131, how you're talking to the unit, whether it's serially over USB or Ethernet, what protocols you're using, what I/O your utilization, built-in I/O or smart rail or smart sticks or other types of I/O. Are you using email? Are you using MQTT? And we say email, we're talking about the OCS feature of email. Are you using WebMI? And if so, what are the number of users, data points, etc. that you're using? So that's really the type of information we're talking about as the opt-in data. And again, the whole goal is to make Cscape, continue to improve by having a better connection between our users and our engineering team without violating anybody's privacy or intellectual property. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look then at Cscape and the process of registering or logging in. Okay, so I just downloaded earlier today, just like some of you will be doing later today. I just downloaded Cscape 9.9 Service Pack 4 and I installed it, and that process is very much the same as it's been before. No differences at this stage. You'll see some big differences once we get to Cscape 10 in terms of how the install package looks, but for now it looks very much the same as it has before. However, once you run Cscape for the first time, then it does ask you to log in. Now, if you're not an existing Cscape user or you don't have login information, okay, then you can hit this Cscape login, but actually this is just an informational page, pardon me here. So if you're curious as to what Cscape login is, besides the information I'm giving you here, you've also got this pop-up box that gives you that information as well. If you don't have an account with us or you haven't filled out the information yet, you click here and then you can see the type of information we're asked for. And again, we're not looking for much information, frankly, and only the information that has a red asterisk is required. Okay, obviously we'd like you to fill it all out, but only the red asterisk is required. Email and password are the same credentials you use to log in on our website to download Cscape in the first place. You will need to answer your country, and then there's other information we'd like for you to provide us if you could. Okay, once you've done that, okay, you can hit the sign up button and you should be good to go there. Okay, again, and that only has to happen once. And then every time you log into Cscape, you just need to provide that email address and password. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for you here. Okay, this is my login information that I use at the Cscape website. See if I can type properly today. Okay, and then you have several options. Okay, one option you have is Remember Me. Let's test that one out first. Okay, first let's go ahead and sign in. I hit the button, and effectively, because my computer is logged into the internet, I was very quickly able to be logged in under my email address here, chuck.ridgway@geapg.com. Now I can just go about using Cscape as I normally would. But let's go ahead and see what some of those other options are from a login standpoint. So I'm going to go ahead and close Cscape. Go ahead and open it again. Okay, and if you remember correctly, I think I selected the Remember Me option. Okay, so Cscape 9.9 Service Pack 4. And since I selected Remember Me, it remembers my email address. So all I have to do is add in my password. Okay. If I'd prefer that it was even more automatic, I could use Keep Me Logged In. And you see it toggles from Remember Me to Keep Me Logged In. Let's go ahead and finish signing in. All right. Again, we signed in quickly. I'll go ahead and close Cscape and let's load it one more time. This time with the Keep Me Logged In option. Okay. So Cscape is starting. There's our pop-up window. Nothing else happened except logged in chuckridgway@geapg.com. Okay, so that's really from a process standpoint, there's really not much to it there. You've got to fill in some information the very first time, decide if you want to type your password in every time, if you want to type your username and password in every time, or if you want to just make it automatic, just like I did and Keep Me Logged In. Okay, so there's really not much to that. Again, if you have any questions on that or any other topics, feel free to chat those up, and Casey will be taking a look at your questions. And if we have some questions at the end, we can also talk about those as well. Okay, so that is the whole registration and login process for 9.9 Service Pack 4. And again, the whole idea is to make Cscape as good of a product as possible by getting that feedback. Okay, so let's move on to our next topic. Let's talk about licensed features. Okay, so licensed features are something we implemented a few years ago, starting with WebMI. So it was the first licensed feature that we offered. And we've then, with Service Pack 3, a few months ago, we've added another licensed feature called MQTT. That's an IoT protocol we've spent a fair amount of time talking about here on this channel and on our webinars. If you need more information, there's plenty of resources, again, in our YouTube channel, on our website, and elsewhere to dive into deeply on MQTT. But now with Service Pack 4, we've added a couple new license features. One, we've added something we'll be covering in great detail next week, and that's the enhanced IEC runtime. And then we've also added the ability to take a standard unit, like an XL4, for instance, or an EXL6, and in the field, license it for J1939 protocol. Now, traditionally, the way we've handled J1939 for the XL4 and the EXL6, etc., is that you had to order that protocol to be loaded at the factory at an extra cost. So there's a special part number for J1939. Now, we're continuing to support that. However, for those users who would like to be able to take a standard unit and upgrade it in the field and not have to necessarily order a separate model number, now we're giving them the ability to purchase a license in the field and have a one-time upgrade to update the unit with J1939 capability. Now, our dual port products like the XL7, the EXL10, the XL Plus, those products support J1939 built in as selectable on the second port. But anyway, these are now with Service Pack 4, these are now the 4 different options for licensed features. And of course, it varies by controller family as to which licensed features are supported. So WebMI is basically supported by all of our modern controllers that have an Ethernet port, from the X4 on up and including the XLEE and XLTE, whereas the MQTT spark plug is limited primarily to our XL series and RCC series, although it's also supported in the X5 as well. The same will be true of the enhanced IEC runtime. And then J1939 is available again in a similar selection, but this time it also includes the XLEE and the XLTE. So that'll give you an idea of the different controllers that support the different licensed features. Okay, so in addition to the fact that we've added a couple new features that can be licensed, we've also changed or streamlined the way in which licensing is done. So prior to Service Pack 4, which is being released today and is just now available, if you wanted to license a controller for WebMI or anything else, you had to access the Horner licensing website. You had no other choice. Starting today with Service Pack 4, all licensing can be strictly accomplished within Cscape. You never have to, exit Cscape to a browser, log into a separate website. None of that is required. Again, a benefit of having the login capability within Cscape. You can do all that now from right within Cscape. Okay, now there are some prerequisites for licensing within Cscape. Okay, not that complicated. One, you got to make sure you have the right controller, right? You can't try and add a feature to a controller that doesn't support it. Second, you need to make sure that that controller has the appropriate firmware version. So if you have an XL4 that's 5 years old, no problem. You can add these features to it, but you're going to have to upgrade the firmware first. So once you've got your controller and the right firmware in it, then you just need a valid voucher code. Okay, and you can either get that from us at Horner, or you can purchase it from your Horner reseller. Okay, once you've got your voucher, now you just run Cscape 9.9 Service Pack 4, Make sure you log in, and that's about all you need. One last thing, you will need a micro SD card in the controller itself. However, you won't have to leave the micro SD card in the controller because the license gets transferred from the card into the internal memory of the product after the licensing is complete. One other note, and that is that WebMI does depend on the micro SD card, but not for its license. It depends on the micro SD card for the web files. Okay, so here's the procedure, and I'm going to demonstrate this in a minute. So again, update the firmware in your controller if you need to. Now, depending on the feature that you're adding to your controller, you're going to need to navigate to that features dialog box. So if you are adding WebMI, you're going to navigate to the graphics editor. If you're adding MQTT, you're going to navigate to the messaging section. So you're going to go to the section of Cscape that covers that particular feature that you're adding. And then there will always be an option to display/validate license. When you press that button, you will at that point receive a dialog that gives you the opportunity to enter your voucher code. Once you've entered the voucher code, you click on Apply Voucher, and in a matter of seconds, you're done. Okay? In the background, a license file gets downloaded from the Horner website, again, in the background, and it ends up on the micro SD card. And it doesn't matter if you're connected to the controller over the serial port, over Ethernet, over USB. As long as you're connected to the controller, then that license file will find its way onto the memory card. And then at the same time, the Horner licensing site is also in the background sending you an email, a confirmation email to your registered email address with a copy of the license file as well. The next step is effectively power cycle the controller. That moves the license from the memory card onto onboard memory. And now, again, unless you're using WebMI, you can remove the micro SD card. And it's possible you may have a different micro SD card with WebMI that has your web pages on it. So you may end up swapping micro SD cards or something. But remember, from a licensing standpoint, micro SD is never permanently required. So that's the procedure. Now, once we're done with that, we'll just want to verify, hey, did this really take? So there's a couple different ways we can do that. One way is we can go to the system menu for license details. That's a menu option that's on the main menu there under the system menu. And then another thing you can do is you can examine system registers and system bits. We have some dedicated ones for both WebMI as well as the other licensed features. So those are a couple different ways you can validate that your controller is indeed licensed. Now, I have some good news for you. Some of you are already aware probably that we currently have a trial period right now where you can effectively license your controllers that you have permanently for MQTT at no cost because we've had a global voucher code available for a few weeks now. And we're extending that period through July at no cost. You can license OCS units for not only MQTT, but also for our enhanced IEC runtime. So if you want to try out the enhanced IEC runtime, after watching our live stream next week, you'll have the opportunity to do that for free. You'll just need a copy of that global voucher code and then license your OCS that you want to try it out on. Now, the good news is any OCS units that you license using this global voucher code, they will be permanently licensed. Okay, so there's nothing for you to do in the future. Okay, they won't require relicensing, the license won't quit working, none of that sort of thing. So that unit that you license with the global voucher during this trial period is good forever. Now, after the trial period is over, even though the OCSs you've already licensed will continue to work beautifully, okay, that global voucher that we're giving you here, that may stop working after July. Or at some point it certainly will, but it could be approximately at the end of July. And then at that stage, you'll have to purchase vouchers for a cost of $50 US list. Pretty economical, really, especially once you try out the features, try out the functionality. And then on the screen there, I've got that global voucher code, which is obtainable from our website as well. Now, you can use that same code whether you're licensing MQTT or the Enhanced IEC Runtime, but you're going to need to license those separately. So just licensing it using that code for MQTT doesn't automatically give you Enhanced IEC, for instance. That would require you to put it in both places. Okay, so again, we're trying to make it as easy as possible for you to try out these new features and determine the value of them. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at licensing a unit here. All right, so back to Cscape. Let's make sure I have the right mouse and keyboard. I'm going to go ahead and open up a program. Let's go ahead and open up our epoxy machine program. All right, so this is the XL4 or the program in the XL4 that I showed you a while back. Okay, so I've got this XL4 here on my desk. All right, and what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to take a look and see what features have already been licensed on this unit. So let me switch back to the camera. And I'm going to go ahead and pull up the system menu and go to License Details. Okay. All right. And as you can see, we do not have either MQTT or Enhanced IEC enabled or licensed with this unit. So let's go ahead and add MQTT here, and I'll show you how that's done. You go ahead and escape out of that menu item there. Okay, now back to Cscape. So again, to license the feature, you need to go to the section of Cscape that covers that feature. All right, I'm going to go ahead and go to, actually before I do that, I'm going to copy that voucher code so that I can just paste it in when it's time. So I've got it copied here on my notepad. I'm just going to copy so it's in my buffer there. Back to Cscape. All right, and again, I just mentioned we need to navigate to the section of the software that we want to license. So in this case, we're going to Program, Messaging, MQTT. Okay? And then we navigate to the Controller tab, and just like I mentioned, there's always a Display Validate license available. So I'll press that button. Okay, and what's happening in the background is that Cscape has already checked our licensing database and validated that there's no MQTT license for that unit. How does it know what unit it is? Well, I'm connected to it via Ethernet in this case. It could be USB, it could be anyway. And it's identified it by its MAC address. Okay, so it doesn't have a license. That's fine. I want to go ahead and license it. So I press Obtain License. It asks for the voucher code. This is where I want to paste in that voucher code. All right, I hit Apply Voucher. All right, that's all it took. The voucher code has already been applied successfully. Unit needs to be power cycled to complete the licensing process. Okay, well, let's do that. And I'm going to go ahead and switch it to the overhead camera and go ahead and making sure, yep, that memory card's in there. Of course, it would have failed if the memory card wasn't in there before. I'm going to go ahead and power cycle. Let's go ahead and see what it looks like here after it reboots. Okay, we're going through the reboot process. Everything passed just fine. I'm going to go to the System menu. I'm going to go under License Details. And sure enough, you can see right there, MQTT license is yes. So that's really all it took to license MQTT in this case, and it really would be the same for any of the licensed features. So let's go back to Cscape. And I'll hit OK here, and I'm just going to cancel out here. I'm not going to go through the trouble of doing all the configuration for MQTT at this stage. And I'm just going to show you some of the other areas where you can do some of the licensing. So just to remind you, on the WebMI side of things, I can pull up the graphics editor, go to the WebMI menu, and go to Display Validate WebMI license here. Okay, and then that same process that we just went through happens here. So no WebMI license has been issued. I can hit OK. I can hit upgrade, and then I'll have an opportunity to paste a voucher in. Now keep in mind, we're not giving away WebMI vouchers at this stage. We're well past the trial period there. However, we are having a spring special on WebMI licenses, both the limited license as well as the unlimited license. So I encourage you to take advantage of that, get some low-cost WebMI vouchers, and use this new, easier method to license your Horner OCS units for WebMI. Okay, so I will cover the enhanced IEC licensing next week, so I'm not going to cover that right now. So that should pretty much give you an idea of what we're talking about in terms of the new and improved and streamlined licensing process for Cscape 9.9 Service Pack 4. All right, so that's 2 out of 3. Let's move on to the next topic, and that is the ability to convert existing register-based programs over to variable-based programs. Okay, so from just backing up half a step here, as many of you may realize, Cscape is a program where effectively version 1.0 was released back in the late 90s. And we're currently up to 9.9, and later this year, we'll finally get to 10. Well, at the very beginning, Cscape was a register-based logic editor, okay? And then a few years later, we added IEC capability. A few years after that, we added variable-based ladder as an option. But we've never had the ability for customers to take existing register-based ladder programs and convert them to a variable-based program. There's a lot of customers out there, really a majority of our customers are still using register-based advanced ladder, and many are hesitant to move to variable-based just because they don't want to leave all those programs behind. Well, now with 9.9 Service Pack 4, we allow those customers to convert their existing register-based advanced ladder programs over to variable-based programs. That's really something that's been asked for quite a while now. Now, at the beginning of the process, when you do this conversion, starting with your existing file that's register-based, you're immediately going to be prompted to rename the file, because once it's converted, you can't go backwards. Okay, so absolutely, and when I say rename the file, I mean copy the file. That's a very deceptive slide there. So no, you're not just going to rename the file, you're going to do a save as effectively, so that you're not just renaming it, you're creating an additional file. Okay, now, when you start the process and you've saved away this new file name, all R, M, and T references in your existing register-based program that have IO names to them, they will automatically be converted, those references will, to variables that utilize the same IO names you used before. Okay, and we're going to demonstrate this so you can kind of see it in action. So again, if you've done a good job of naming your R's, M, and T references with IO names that are used in your program, those IO names are going to carry straight through as the variable names in the new program. Now, any variables you didn't name are going to still be converted to variables, but they're going to be given a generic name using a standardized naming convention. Okay, they're going to be starting with VAR underscore and then the reference number. Okay. Next, you've got system and IO references. So S and SR bits, IQ, AI, and AQ references, those are converted to variables as well, and they're given standardized names. All right. Now, once it's done, Cscape will report to you that the action is complete, and it will let you know the size of the new program. And the size of the new program is going to be bigger than the old program just based on the way that the variable programs are constructed. Now, to compensate for that, and to make sure you don't have a scenario where you've converted a register-based program to variable-based and now it won't fit in your controller. And let's face it, that's only going to happen on really large programs anyway. But just to make sure that that doesn't happen, firmware 15.5, which is the companion firmware to Service Pack 4, doubles program capacity in all standard controllers. So if your standard controller you're using, like an XL4, has 1 megabyte type program storage capability for logic, after 15.5, it will have 2 megabyte. If your micro OCS X4 has 256K for logic memory, after 15.5, when you do that update yourself, boom, you've doubled the capacity to 512 KB. Okay, so yes, the programs are bigger, but it should not be a problem for you because of the fact that firmware 15.5 doubles your logic capacity. Okay, some other points that are important to cover before we demonstrate this feature. If you have any errors during your conversion process, if there were issues with the program before you tried to convert it, and those issues persist, which they would, it doesn't magically solve issues, then you're going to have the opportunity to abort the conversion, or you can go ahead and continue it. Now, if you have registers or references that were used with multiple data types, so you may have used R1 with an instruction that handled it as bytes. You could have used R1 with an instruction that handled it as integers. In theory, you could even use R1 with an instruction that handled, as a double integer. If you have done that and you have variables that were used in instructions with different data types, then it's going to create multiple variables in the variable-based program. It's just they're going to have a suffix on the end that reflect the data type, whether it's 16-bit, 32-bit, etc. Okay. After you've another thing that's important to note is that you will see that Cscape, when it does this conversion process, is going to continue to map the references that you mapped yourself to different IO names. Those mappings will remain. Okay, now that may be confusing to some folks because one of the advantages of variable-based logic is that you don't have to map variables to specific memory addresses most of the time. Unless you're talking about real-world IO, where you're talking about data that gets sent over a network, usually there's no mapping required. Well, to make sure that there's the best possible opportunity for your program that you wrote using register-based ladder to convert and execute perfectly using variables, that same program, then Cscape goes ahead and maps everything the same way you did. Now, from that point forward, as you enhance that program, add variables, etc., absolutely you have no need or requirement to continue to map every variable or new variable that you create. However, for existing programs, Cscape does do that mapping, again, to try and ensure that that program's going to work perfectly after conversion. Now, again, after you're done converting and you start working with a new program, not only can you create new variables, you can rename the existing variables if you want. No issues there. Okay? So those are some extra points that I wanted to cover when it comes to the conversion process. A couple more things to talk about with this before we demonstrate it. Okay, now, once you have converted your program and you're now working with the new program and you want to start, doing things like debugging and using the watch window to check out the value of variables, one thing you'll notice is that the watch window looks a little different. Okay? Excuse me. With register-based logic, the memory address is always the first column. With variable-based addressing, the variable name is the first column, and that makes sense, right? What may not make sense to some people is the fact that the memory column is still there to begin with. Why is that? Well, it's really just there to assist existing users. Because even though, strictly speaking, monitoring the value of a variable is usually all you need to know, you really don't care what register it's actually mapped to most of the time, because our existing users are so accustomed to using register-based programs, by keeping it there, at least on the watch window in a different column, it can be useful to them as they kind of get their head wrapped around this new approach to programming. It can also be useful for troubleshooting as well. Now, in the future, as time goes on and more of our users are using variable-based programming, and as Cscape evolves into Cscape 10 and beyond, and we improve the watch windows and other similar debugging tools, at some point you will see the memory column drop off because it really won't be relevant or even useful to that many people anymore. But for now, we're leaving it in there. Okay, now let's go ahead and convert a program over and see what it looks like. All right, so that means back to Cscape. All right. Okay, for this demonstration, I'm going to go ahead and I would convert my epoxy machine program, but if you notice here, my epoxy machine is already in variable-based logic, so not going to be able to convert that one. So let's close that here. Okay, it's been modified. Do I want to save it? I do not. All right, let's go ahead and open up another program. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and pull up a barcode program that I wrote for the XL4. Okay, and this definitely is a variable-based program. How can we tell? Well, you can see obviously both variable names, which are really called IO names with register-based Cscape, and then we've got with every single element here, we have not only we have IO names. And you'll notice that most things have been named, but not everything. You'll notice here's one that hasn't been named. But let's go ahead and do this conversion. Now, how do we do that? Well, the way we perform that is there's no actual menu object for it, but we actually right-click on the project navigator, and here at the bottom, we have convert to variable-based CSP file. Okay, so it says, do you want to convert to a variable-based ladder programming? Yes, we do. I'm going to hit the start button here. Okay, we need to give it a name. Okay, I'm just going to call it convert with it. I'll put a convert at the end and hit save. Okay, and you can watch it kind of shows you all the different steps it's taking. All right, so before I hit OK there, let's take a look. So it details all the steps and what it had to do. All right, now this is a relatively small program. Went really fast. Even for a pretty large program, it still goes pretty quick, to be honest with you. And then when it's done, it has this pop-up here that tells you the conversion is successful. Now let's take a close look here at the size. Holy cannoli, that size went up tremendously. All right, what happened? Well, the increase in logic size, just like it says here, is due to the creation of the new program variables list. And even though the difference here is significant in terms of, if you're like, oh geez, it went up by 5 times or something. The reality is actually probably 50 times. The reality is every program doesn't go up in size by 50 times. Most programs you're going to have, some additional size that gets added to it, but we absolutely don't anticipate a scenario where the improved logic size that 15.5 can give you will result in programs that don't fit. We don't anticipate that at all. And all the testing we've done so far has indicated that, not to be a problem. Okay, so that's the whole process here. Okay, so I'll say okay. All right, and magically, we have that same program converted over to a variable-based program. All right, now you can see here, as we kind of scroll down through, variable names have carried through pretty extensively here. All right, and then ones that we did not name have been given a default name. So this was just T10 in the old program. Now it's called VAR_T10. Okay, so that's kind of an example of a standardized variable name. Let's go ahead and, so we can take a closer look at this, let's go ahead and pull up the variable window. All right, let me go ahead and drag this over here where we can actually see it. I'll stretch it out here. All right, let me stretch out the name and expand the variable list. Make it a little bigger vertically so we can actually see it better. Stretch out a couple columns here. Okay, so this is the list of all of our variables now for this program. Okay, And you'll notice most of them, of course, these are system bits and system registers. These are just default ones. Okay, but down here at the bottom, we've got the variables that were carried through from IO names. And then we've also got, as you can see here, and I already pointed this one out, we've also got some default variable names as well for variables that weren't created at all. Now, interestingly enough, you notice that both for some variables that carried through, as well as some variables that were undefined before, this receive buffer variable was used both in an 8-bit instruction as well as a 16-bit instruction in the register-based program. That's something you can do in register-based programs because they don't really care about data format, at least in terms of the way you program them. It really matters in terms of how they execute, but not necessarily in terms of how you configure them. So that doesn't work that way in variable-based programming. So it created actually 2 variables for each one of these, an 8-bit and a 16-bit version of that same variable. And these aren't just variables. These happen to become arrays. Why are they arrays? Well, they were arrays because they were used in block move instructions. Block move instructions take a group of variables and move them from point A to point B. In a variable-based approach, okay, instead of just depending on the variables being or the registers and memory references being consecutive, with a variable-based approach, you would create an array, and that's what's been done here. So we have an 8-bit variable array with 32 members from 0 to 31, and then a 16-bit variable array with 16 members in it. Okay, and that same thing was done for both a variable name that carried through because we had named it, and one that didn't carry through because we hadn't named it. Okay, so that should give you a flavor for what things look like in your variable list once you're done converting. Now, you'll also notice over here, okay, from this point down, because this is really the point at which we start with our variables that were in our previous program, you'll notice that Cscape has continued to carry through the mapping or the memory references for each of these variables. Now, was that strictly required? In most cases, no. But like I mentioned when I talked about it before, the reason that Cscape is doing this is to try and ensure that the program that worked perfectly, or that a program that worked perfectly in register-based logic will continue to work perfectly in variable-based logic. So if you did something really clever that is dependent on register location, that will continue to work after conversion. Now, if I go ahead and add variables here to this list, which I can easily do if I continue to go ahead and edit this program, there'll be no problem in me adding variables and not mapping them across to a specific memory location if I don't need to. Now, if I'm adding a new variable that is tied to a real-world I/O point, or that I'm going to communicate over Modbus, then yeah, I'm probably going to need to map it in that case. But if we're talking about a general-purpose variable that typically would be used for internal purposes, no, I don't need to map moving forward. Okay? So hopefully that gives you a flavor for how the program conversion works. Again, from register-based logic over to variable-based logic. Okay, so a few more things to cover before we wrap things up and answer any questions that cropped up during the broadcast. Okay, this is an important follow-up from last week. So last week we had our live stream, which was on the whole process of creating a bootable micro SD drive and updating controllers using a bootable micro SD card instead of doing it the traditional way, where you just take a standard micro SD, throw some files on it from our website, go to the bootloader update menu, which you can trigger from the unit itself and update that way. That's kind of the traditional way of doing firmware updates. And we showed you how to use the bootloader method, where you ultimately take a Horner utility, create a bootable micro SD, and then actually boot from that micro SD by pressing a button in at power up, and I demonstrated that. Now, last week, we mentioned the fact that, this really is something that you shouldn't have to use very often, and that's still true. However, our engineering team has upped their recommendation if you are a user of the EXL6 the EXL Wide, or the EXL10. Those three particular models, they're recommending that when you upgrade to 15.5, that you use this bootable micro SD method for the best possible success. Okay, the whole reason to use this method with these products is because there is a bug in the CPU, the microprocessor that we utilize that we don't have any control over, and a higher percentage than we would like of users when they are doing firmware updates are ending up with a bricked unit, and then they need some help in getting these things recovered. The engineering team basically said, hey, for these three models, we need to make sure they're using this bootable micro SD method. So you can check out last week's live stream for that. And then also when we post firmware 15.5, we'll also be posting a short 2 or 3 minute video showing you this method as well. Okay, so and again, this is primarily for the EXL6, EXLW, and EXL10. Before we move on to talk about what's happening next week, let me go ahead and bring Casey back in. There he is. Okay, anything I missed, Casey? Any questions that I need to answer, that things that you think I missed or I should talk about, or any questions that we need to address from the group?
Maybe not any. I did answer quite a few in the chat section, so if anybody wants to take a look at that. One that we would probably reiterate is the evaluation mode for the login features.
Sure.
Just the availability of it, that whether you're actually connected to the internet or not, you can actually connect using the evaluation mode, and that if you basically get any internet connection anytime within that 30 days, it'll re-extend that eval period, so you don't necessarily, it's not a finite 30 days to use like some products are.
True. So right, so let's give an example. Let's say that let's say we are normally logged in to Cscape when we're at the office or at home. 99% of the time we're logged in because we have an internet connection. Let's say we go to the field, we take a trip to Nepal, okay, for a 2-week startup in Nepal. I think I was pronouncing that wrong. And we just don't have any internet access there. I'm sure they have internet access in Nepal, but maybe where you are, you don't have it. Well, you can run Cscape, use it just without internet connection by opening it in evaluation mode, opening it the normal way, but then selecting evaluation mode. And from the first time you do that, you've got 30 days from that point before you have to take any additional steps like uninstalling it and reinstalling it and that sort of thing. So, and then again, if you went back to the hotel at night even and logged into Cscape, that would reset the timer, just like you said. So we don't think with a 30-day scenario like that, we're going to have too many issues with customers having problems. Anything else?
Don't think so. I think we covered most of the other questions for sure.
Okay, very good. I do encourage you to, for those of you watching, take advantage of these free licenses for both MQTT as well as Enhanced IEC. We'll cover the Enhanced IEC, of course, in next week's live stream, because once those controllers are licensed, they're licensed forever. So even if you're not going to get around to trying those new features for a while, if you can get your units licensed in a timely fashion, when you get around to it later on in a few months even, you'll have units that are already licensed and ready to try out. So I would encourage you to do that. Okay. I do also want to remind everyone not to miss part 2 of Cscape 9.9 Service Pack 4. And again, our focus next week is on Enhanced IEC. We've really upped the game there in terms of speed and capacity and troubleshooting tools and simulation and all kinds of good stuff with our IEC editor. We've got a lot of really loyal Cscape users that love IEC, and they actually use and enjoy our standard IEC capabilities, but they're really going to be excited about the enhancements that have been made in Service Pack 4. So we're going to show those off in great detail next week. Also, you don't want to miss, just in 2 days, our X10 launch webinar. So we've got a new micro OCS model that's 10 inches in size. It's a 10-inch widescreen. You may have seen the unboxing video that we have on our website. If not, I encourage you to check that out. but this is an exciting new product. It's incredibly cost-effective and functional with really a really nice looking screen there. So I think you'll be very impressed, and we're going to give you all the details on that product as well. I will want to let you know that for the Micro OCS X10 launch, you will need to register for that event, and it will be broadcast using our standard webinar tool, which is called Big Marker. So just go to the Horner website to register, or respond to the link that's provided in the email newsletters that go out periodically, and don't miss the X10 launch webinar. Okay, well, I think that is going to wrap things up for this week. We really appreciate you attending, and we hope we've given you some good content. And take an opportunity to try out Cscape 9.9 Service Pack 4. We'll get the firmware posted in a timely fashion in the next day or so. And remember, anytime you're trying out new software, test it out. Make sure it has what you need. Don't immediately go out and use it on every machine in your facility. You know, you'll want to make sure you test things thoroughly. And I would say that, I say that about every release we have. I just want you to be smart when it comes to your control equipment. Once again, thanks for joining us, and we will hopefully see many of you again on Thursday for the Micro X10 launch.